Hi, we already know quite a bit about templates and routes. In this episode, we'll see how controllers come into play and also learn another set of template helpers. So let's create a form, which is our bread and butter in web development world. Let's say we want the ability to add new friend. So as usual, we start from a route. So we go to app.js file, and inside of here in friends, we'll have another route and we call it new. Now let's add link to this new route in friends template. So we go to index.html, and here in friends, right below our h2, let's create link to add new friend, and it points to friends.new. Okay, so now we need the template itself. So let's create it right here, HBS, and we'll do friends new, and here we will have the form. So we'll have first name. And to define input field, we'll just use Ember handlebars helper input, like this. So next we have label last name, and as you can imagine, it's absolutely the same, input. And then we'll have about, but this time we want to use textarea, and for that in Ember we also have helper that called textarea. And then we'll have a button, create. So this is just the lifeless form. So if we go to browser, let's reload the page. Now we have this add new friend link. Let's go there, and here it is, the form rendered in place of details. Now we need to bind these form elements to some model and its attributes. So we need to provide some model to this template, friends new. And we already know how to do that. We do it in a route object. So let's go to app.js and here define another route, and we call it friends new. Inside of it, again, model hook, and we're going to return a simple object with first name, last name, and about. Okay, now we have a model. So now friends new route has a model. So we can use these attributes in our template right here. So we need to bind first name to this input field. So here is the important thing to remember about form helpers in Ember. If you pass attribute value in quotes, so say we have the class form control, then it takes it as it is, as a string. It will have the class form control. Or for example, if you have value high, it will take it as a value high. But if we remove these quotes and provide the attribute first name, then it will be bound to this attribute, and it will be changing if this attribute changes. So we can illustrate it like this. So now this friends new template is bound to model which has first name attribute. When we change it here in input field, it will be changed also here just as a display. So let's go to browser, reload the page, and let's try it out, and you can see how it is changing right here. Excellent. So this is how we bind model attributes to the form fields. So let's continue with that. We'll do the same thing for last name and the same thing for textarea, about. So now we need to create this record and push it to our friends collection. So first we need to react on click an event on this button. So we create new object when we click this button. For that, we need to add action to this button, and we do it like this, action, and we provide the name of this action. We call this action create. What it means is that by default, Ember will catch click event on this button and send this named event we provided. In our case, we provided the name create, so it will send this create message to the controller of this template. In our case, that's the friends new controller. It will then bubble up to the friends new route if this event handler is not in that controller. So if we go to browser, reload the page, and click on this create, we'll have an error because nothing handled the action create. To catch this event, first we need to, of course, to define the controller. So let's go to app.js and let's define the controller. So that's going to be friends new controller, which is the object controller. So in Ember we have three types of controllers. The object controller, and that means that it's a single object. the array controller, and that means that the model is the collection, and the ember controller, which is the general purpose controller. So in this case, we have single object controller, so we use object controller. And now, to catch this event, we define actions object right here, and inside of it, the name of the event we want to catch. In our case, that's create. Okay, let's just alert hi, like such, reload the page, click on create, and here it is. We handled the event generated by template. So again, what happened is when we click on this button, this click is intercepted by Ember and named create, and then this event is sent to a controller. In controller, it looks for actions object, and inside of it, the method with the same name as this event name. If it finds it, like in our case, then this event is handled. If not, then it bubbles up to the friend's new route. So we could do the same thing in friend's route. So we could actually cut it from here and, for example, go to friend's route and paste it here. Let's try it out in the browser. And we still caught it, but now we caught it actually in a route. Okay, so that's one thing where a controller could be useful, catching events sent by templates and views. So I'm going to return this back to the controller. So another important role is to store application state. So the application state is information that is not needed to be stored persistently. So models are responsible for storing persistent data, but in our front-end application, we have another logic that should not be saved in database, like what components are visible on the page or disabled, etc. So let's have a look. Say we want to make this first name and last name mandatory, so if we do not have them, we want to make this button disabled. Very easy. So for that, we need some variable which stores this application state. And this state is temporary, so when user reloads the page, he doesn't expect this value to be saved. So for example, now imagine that this button is disabled because I do not have first name and last name. Then I put some right here, and that becomes enabled, and then I reload the page, and it's still enabled. That doesn't make sense, right? So we do not want to save this state. And we store such kind of information in a controller. So in a controller, let's define here the new variable, and we call it isInvalid. And by default, it's true. That's the flag that tells the button whether it's enabled or disabled. So now in index.html here in button, we'll use another helper, bind-attr. This helper binds elements attribute to some dynamic attribute of the model. So in this case, we want to bind it to the controller variable, which we call isInvalid, and the attribute itself is disabled. So disabled is invalid. So what it does, if isInvalid is true, then disabled will be rendered. If isInvalid is false, then disabled will be removed. Okay, so now if we go to browser, load the page, you will see that create is actually disabled. Excellent. So now we need to enable it when both of these fields have content. So to do that, we need to observe these two model attributes, first name and last name. And we'll talk about observers and computed properties in the next episode. But now let's just get a glimpse on it. So right here, I will define another function. I will call it valid form. It's going to be a function. And basically, this function will be the observer. So it will observe first name and last name. So what it means is that every time first name or last name is changed in any way, this function will be called. So every time when it's called, we want to check the first name and the last name. So we'll do something like this. If this get, and we get the first name, not equals empty string, and this get, and we get the last name, also not equals empty strings. So if both of these attributes are not empty, then we set the isInvalid attribute to false. So else, we set isInvalid attribute to true, like this. So let's check it in the browser. So we reload the page and the create button is disabled, still disabled. Enabled, excellent. If I make this one empty, it's back to disabled. So this is very dynamic, and that's how we do it. Okay, so now we have this magical button, and now we need to push this newly created friend into our collection. And by the way, let's change collection a little bit. So here we have our collection, and we have the name, not the first name. So I'm gonna add the first name right here. And let's here also define the last name, which will be empty by default. And also, of course, we need to change our friend about template because we changed the model. So not the name, but the first name. Okay. So when we click on create button, we want to create copy of this object and then this new copy pushed to this friends collection. So we need a way to get to this collection, right? So because right now we are in the friends new controller, and friends new controller's model is this empty object. But we need somehow to access the model of friends route, which is this, or friends controller. And we do it with the help of needs. So we specify that this friends new controller actually needs friends controller as well. And this way, it can take the friends controller model. Okay, we'll see how to use it in a bit. Okay, so now in our create action, first of all, we define new friend, and that's gonna be the Ember copy. So we copy this object, this content, and this content is where the model is stored. So we take the model from the controller and copy this object into the new friend. And then we need to push this object into our collection. And that collection is the model of the friends controller. So we can access this with this get controllers friends. So because of this needs option here, we are able to do this. So now this thing here is the collection. So we can add object to this collection, new friend. And after that, let's redirect back to friends route. And for this, we use transition to route method to friends. So also in index.html, in friends, we also need to change this name to first name as well. Okay, so now let's go to browser, reload the page, and let's add user. Click on create, and you can see that we created new user. We redirected back to friends. And we even can see the details about this user. But we have a problem with URL. You can see here that we do not have ID anywhere, so this ID is undefined. So to fix this, we need to specify ID. So for that, we'll just simulate the ID. So here, when we create new route, we'll add ID, and that ID will be app.friends or .length +1. Okay, so now if we go back here and create new user, it is here, and you can see in the URL that we have this 4, ID equals 4, and it works perfectly fine. Great. Okay, it's time for you to get some practice. Here what I've got. In a books, I created new button. So when you click on this new button, you have the form. Again, everything that we did in this episode just repeated in a more pretty way, right? So we have the create button and it is disabled, or you can even make it, invisible or something like that. So now when I fill up the form and specify, for example, cover, the URL to cover, I'm using the binding. So when I paste the URL to the image, I can see the result. And after that, I just create it. I'm redirected back to books, and I have this catcher in the rye in my list, and I can see the details about this book. Just try it out, play with it, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach me. Okay, in this episode, we saw how to use controllers for two purposes: store application state and handle events or actions. We also saw how two controllers can communicate with each other. On a template side, we learned action and bind-attr helpers and form helpers input and text area. So thank you very much for your time, and see you in the next episode.